Alright, this is a tutorial in doing a dialogue system using scriptable objects. So I've set up a little basic scene over here. I've got my little player and an NPC. So the idea is to just walk up to the NPC, press E, and open a dialogue. So to show you what happens at the moment, you can just walk around, and the little dialogue pops up, and you can press E, and interact happens over there. So if I just show you the basic controls quick, it's just using the Unity input system here. It's got basic move and interact E. Then our basic character controller. We are creating the new character controls over there, the basic controls. Then we subscribe to the move and the interact, and we have a set of events going off for those. For the trigger to show up the little UI over there, we have just a basic trigger on trigger enter, and then we broadcast the event. With the move, we have a basic translate, and then we also have a we're just modifying the forward vector to have it look at the direction of travel. You can also do this for 2D games, but instead of using forward, use .right, and then you can set it to a vector and it'll point in that direction. Then I'm just using a loop to make it all smooth. Let's see the UI controls. So the UI interact over here. This just has a little look at for that to look at the camera, and then we just subscribe to the interact and the show UI and hide UI. The show and the hide obviously just shows and hides the canvas, and the interact uses a Unity event to fire off whatever our interaction is going to be. Since this is a short demonstration, I'm not going to be going and creating an event system for any interactable to work, because then I would use interfaces for that and have any interactable be recorded and passed through with the event. But in this case, I'm just going to manually hook up whatever I want my interact to be to fire off the dialogue on NPC. Right, so we're doing scriptable objects, so let's go and just create a new folder over here. Dialogue system, cool. And gonna go and create a new script over here. This is going to be our dialogue object for our scriptable object. Now there is a conflict there, that's just because of my namespacing. Let me just add that in there. And that should get rid of that error. Perfect, okay. So the scriptable object basically acts as a template. So if we just type in here scriptable object, we get our whole basically layout of what we want for a scriptable object. It's got a create asset menu. This just allows it to be able to include in the right click menu over here. So got file names, dialog object, and I'm just going to take away the menu item. So if you put a slash there, anything before that now becomes a menu item and you can dive down deeper. So this is going to be dialog, or let's go NPC dialog object, and the file name, that's just the default file name. So you'll notice that it inherits from scriptable object. Scriptable object itself is a object. It inherits from object, same as mono behavior. So this does have some differences to your standard mono behavior. It's not something you can just drag onto an object, but it is also persistent. So any changes you make will persist through play mode and out of play mode. So let's go and set up our details of what we want in our scriptable object, in our dialogue. So obviously we need some dialogue. So that we're going to make a list of string, and that's going to be our dialogue strings. And we're going to make a list of strings so that when you interact with an NPC, they can have any number of dialogue sentences or parts to it before then offering options to the player to interact and give options back to the NPC then. So let's just do that, equals new list of strings. And of course we're going to make this a public field, since we'll need to be accessing this outside of the script. And then once the dialogue is complete, we'll probably want to link up with another dialogue object. So we can simply add in a public and then reference our dialogue object for end dialogue. Okay, so basically this can just link to another dialogue, to another dialogue, to another dialogue. End of dialogue. And this can be totally optional. It doesn't have to be included. Let's actually make that a header. And this is going to be, or let's say, FollowOn Dialogue. Optional. So that's going to be the FollowOn dialogue, and this is going to be the actual dialogue over here. Okay, so we've created a really basic structure. If we go down here, wait for it to compile, great. And then right click, and we'll see now here's our object, NPC dialogue object. So if we go and create a basic one there, we'll just say test dialogue. And we can see we have our list of strings and we have our end dialogue option here. So we could add in, say, 3 items over here. And let's say, hello, my name is Cube. Cool. Bit of a racist cube there. Right. So we have a dialogue, and what we want is to play through one set of dialogue, then the next, and possibly then have some options for the player to interact with. So let's first get this just showing up. Okay, so we interact with our character, so we need a script for the character then, or a dialogue script. Let's make it dialogue interact, and we're going to just drop that and drop that on the NPC. Okay, and I'm just going to apply it to my variant, NPC variant there. Okay, if we open up that script, now we need first of all a reference to whatever dialogue script we're going to be starting with. Dialogue object, and we'll just call it that, and then we're going to need a public void, and we can just call it interact. Cool. Or let's make it more descriptive, start dialogue. Okay, then let's make this a simple enumerator for display dialogue. And we're just going to start up that coroutine over here for display dialogue. And then in here, we're going to loop through all our string options in our dialogue object and just log them out to the console very simply. So we're going to do a for loop, and we're going to go through the dialogue object dot dialogue. And I'm referencing the wrong dialogue object here. Sorry, that's from my previous project, because I'm not using the correct namespace. If I could type properly. Right, okay. Now that should be the correct object. Dialog strings, there they are. So .count, we're going to loop through all of those, and we're going to say just go log, and we're going to log out that dialog, and then we're going to just go yield return new wait for seconds, and just wait, maybe let's just do 1 second. Cool, now we've got a slot for our dialog over there, so we can put in our dialog object, and then on our interact we're going to go to our dialog interact script and find the start dialog option there. So now when we walk up to our character here, press E, we have some dialog happening in sequence. So if we wanted to show that up on screen here, what we could do is just add in, let's add in a little canvas over here. Yeah, constant is fine. And we're going to add in an image, which we're going to span this width, but give it some space. Cool, let's just make it dark gray. And add in a text object here, set that to white, or let's make it like a gray. Cool. Set that to span the width and also give it some space once more. And then let's start by just putting that in the middle. Okay, so this is going to be our object here, and we're not going to need a record. Oh, we might need one later on actually. Okay, so we're just going to turn this on and off as needed. So in our NPC, we're just going to need a reference to that UI object over there. And that's going to be a canvas object. And we're also going to need the text element. So in the dialog canvas over there, and then right at the beginning we're going to say dot enabled equals true, and then right at the end set that to false. Okay, and then we're going to need another serialized field for text, and this is going to be the dialog text, and in here we can say dialog text.text equals, and let's set it to that, and then get rid of that. Cool. So let's just assign the references now, and we're going to put the object in there and the text in there, and also let's just turn this off to begin with. There we go. Okay, some basic dialog over there. And let's say the dialog, some might be long and some might be quite short. So why don't we create a custom data type for what our dialog string is that can have all these sort of options in them. So let's make a public struct for dialog. Dialog segments, I guess. Okay. Of course not those, just that. Cool. Okay, so this is going to house our, first of all, a public string for the actual dialog text. And then let's also do a public float for dialog display time, and let's set the default for that to just 1 second. Of course we can't set defaults with a struct, so let's just do that. Right, and then we also do want to be able to see this in the inspector, so we do have to make this system.serializable so that Unity knows to serialize the struct. You also have to do that with classes that don't inherit from Scriptable Object or from MongoBehavior. So if it's just a plain old class. Okay, then instead of this being a list of string, let's make this a list of dialog segment. And then let's also just change the name of this to segments. And that's going to be dialog segments.I dot, and then in this case the text. So we could actually change this into a for loop, rather, for each loop, and make it for each dialog in dialog object dot segments, yes. And then take those two, move them up there, get rid of that one, and make this equal dialog.dialog text, and this dialog.dialog display time. So if we come back to Unity over here, you can see our object is now changed. We have lost those other changes because we did manipulate that. But now we have some extra settings here, and we can totally just keep adding to that. So if we made that one 2 seconds and say hello, my name is Cube. Cubes are the best. Especially the blue ones. Now we should find that this one hangs around quite long afterwards. There we go. Okay, definitely did stay around longer than the other two. So now say we wanted to add in some choices there for the player to interact with the dialogue. So say there was a question coming up over there. We would need to add into our dialogue segment here some additional functionality to basically link to a new dialogue string, a new dialogue chain. So what we could do with that is, let's see, we want any number of options. So it'll be a list of options, and the option will basically say, here's a question, these are your options, and these are the FollowOn Dialogue objects. So let's perhaps create another struct here for dialogue choice. Yeah, and then we're going to have a public string for the dialog choice and a public dialog object for the follow-on chain. Let's call it follow-on dialog, and once again we do need this system.serializable. And now in our dialog segment we can have the option for a dialog choice. So let's make that a public list of dialog choice and make it dialog choices equals, nope, we can't initiate it in a struct, which is fine because we need to actually set it out in here first anyways. Okay, so now we have choices over here. Now we can simply just check that if there are choices, then give the choice dialog, otherwise just play it through. Right, so in our third one, let's give 3 options. Red rules. Right, then we need some FollowOn Dialogue for whether if these get chosen, right? So we can actually go and create another dialog over here, and this can be for now. Yeah, your naming will be quite important here in order to actually track what dialog goes in where. You might want to make a bunch of folders following for specific NPCs. So this would be blue NPC, and then let's just make a folder over here for dialogue, and just move, where did that folder go? It's in there. And these ones, let's just move those into there as well. Let's make that intro. That's response to red as the option. Okay, so this, let's just and let's give that one 2 seconds there. If it's a response to blue, wait, what were the options? It was red, yellow, and green. So this would be response to yellow. And then a response to green. Okay, then let's just drop our responses in. So response to red goes in there, response to green goes in there, and response to yellow goes in there. Cool. So it's going to initiate it, it's going to read out the options and then give that, and then link on to the following dialogue there. So if we go back to our interaction, at the moment we're just displaying dialogue and then waiting for a couple seconds. So what we need to do is, instead of just waiting, if there are options, then the wait will not happen. So we can go and say if dialogue dot and then dialogue dot dialogue choices dot count is 0. Then we're just going to wait, else we're going to say open options panel. Okay, so for the options panel we'll need to create a little bit of UI for that to work out. So let's go and create an image over here at the bottom, make that span, let's put that in there. Make that span the size of that, and we're going to make it only a height of 60. No, let's make it a height of 100. Okay, and actually we're going to keep this outside here and say options, and then we're going to just wrap everything with a horizontal in the middle center. Don't force expand. And now the width. Okay, we do want to, nope, we need to get rid of that horizontal. Cool. We need another one in between that. This is going to be cool layout. We want to make this the maximum size of our screen. Okay. Then we're going to drop our two options in there. And here we can add a vertical layout group rather. Middle center. And that we want to control the width. Yes, so it fully expands. And otherwise the height, we're not going to expand that. And let's turn off this image here. So basically, if we don't have options, then it only shows that one in the middle, otherwise it shows one under the other. And for this one, we'll probably need to make it a little bit taller for all the options. Yeah, let's do that. And then just offset the color slightly. Enough. There we go. Okay, and inside of our options then, let's just create an empty here. Just call it option items, just make it the full size. Because there's already a layout group on this parent, you can't put another layout group directly there, you have to have a gap, basically. So we're going to do that, and then this is going to become our option over here. And on this, we're going to also make it a vertical layout group. We're going to control the width, so we go full width. And we're not going to let the height expand. And then we're going to have a slight padding around the whole thing. Okay. So this is going to become our option button. And just going to get rid of that ugly background, change this, and change the text color from that to white. Not going to do that. And normal should be fine. Great. Okay, so let's make this a prefab. Where did it go? There it is, prefabs. Okay, option button. So we're just going to spawn a bunch of these and change the text and then link them up. Okay, and options can be turned off. Okay, so our dialog over here is going to need an object, a game object, for the dialog options parent. We're going to need a game object for dialog options for the dialog options button prefab, so we can instantiate a few buttons when we need options. And we're also going to need, well, we're going to need the parent to spawn it in, and we're going to need the container actually. So the container will be this, and the parent will be that, where the buttons actually get spawned into. Okay, so if there are options, then we need to go through all our options. So we're going to do that with a for each. And for each option in dialog.options.choices, there we go. Then we're going to say game object new button equals instantiate, and what we're going to instantiate is our button prefab. Oops. And we're going to instantiate it into the parent, like so. And of course that parent actually needs to be a transform. Great. Okay, so that spawns the new button. Then we need to actually set the text on that button. So we can do that with new button dot transform dot get child. So So we just get the text element. So then it's .get component, and we're looking for the text equals, and that will be option dot dialog choice. Okay. We also need our button to actually be hooked up to some kind of response. So how should we do that? Okay, well, let's just test this out and set those three up there for now. And the dialog container dot set active to true, and then at the bottom here set it to false. Okay, on our NPC we have our options container and our parent and our button. Let's just turn off that canvas to begin with. Okay, so it switched everything off as soon as it reached the last one. Oh right, because it instantiated and then immediately went off. So we need probably a bool for option selected equals false. And once we have spawned all of those, while not option selected, you'll return null. And then we're going to need a public void for option selected, and in here we're probably going to have to give it an int, or it might just give the actual dialog object. Let's give it the dialog object selected option. Okay, and then option selected equals true. Okay, so we'll come back to this. We'll just test out what we've got working here so far. So we should get... Okay, we have there 3 options. Great. Okay, I see that. Could use a little bit of spacing, and we could push that in the middle center. That'll look nicer. Right, so for this, I'm thinking we need to make a script to put on the button, which will take care of all of that. It's just going to be easier. So let's put in a new UI script here. This will be UI dialog option. And in here, we're going to do a public void setup. And in the setup, we're going to set our callback. Well, we're going to do that. So we need probably an idea of who dialog interact is. Let's do... do that. So we have dialog interact, and we do need to add this namespace. So that it knows what this is. And then over here we're going to give it a dialog. dialog interact and just say in here dialog interact equals underscore dialog interact. Cool. And then we also need to give it a dialog object. Dialog object. And do the same thing over here. Okay. With that, then we can also do... No, actually we don't. We can do that in the button itself. So then it's going to be via public void select option, and that's going to be called from the actual button. And then in that case, we're just going to go dialog interact dot select dot option selected and give it the dialog object that this button was spawned with. Okay, so we're going to call this from over here. And actually the whole text and dialog should probably be set up directly in here. It's going to be easier to maintain as a hierarchy then. So we can do a serialized field for text, which means we'll need the UI namespace there. For dialog text, and then in here we can say dialog text.text equals our dialog object dot... Oh no, yeah, that's right, that's going to come through differently because that comes directly from the option. Okay, no matter, then we just need to make that a string for dialog text. Right, let's just do that underscore naming conflict. Okay. Then in our interact, instead of doing that, we will need that part. It'll be new button dot get components, and it's going to be UI dialog option dot setup, and then in here we're going to give it this, the actual dialog object. So that would be did we save that? Well, it's a list of dialog choices, right? Yes, and here's our option. Our option is the dialog choice. And our dialog choice has the FollowOn dialog. Okay, dialog choice dot FollowOn. No? There's the FollowOn dialog. And then the actual text. Okay. So we call that setup, which then receives all of that, and then our button is going to trigger that. The dialog object is then going to be passed into here, where we will need to set what our current dialog object is. Option selected becomes true, we set that, and then we'll need to start up the coroutine once more. Now that's going to happen in one frame, and this is going to not be quite finished just yet. So what we can do is just add in a yield return null at the beginning here, so it just gives it a frame chance for the previous one to finish off and the new one to begin then. Alright, so let's set up the button. Our prefab button Let's add in the option and then link up the option there in the button to select option. And then we need our text as well, which is that. Okay, that I think is it, is it? Test it out. Okay, then yellow is king. Yay, look at that. Dialogue. Okay, so now the whole dialogue system doesn't actually restart. So what we could do is actually feed in an object directly into this, rather than having this one be set, because we want it to trigger off the same way. An NPC would usually start off with the same dialogue every time. So let's put in a dialogue object here, in there, and actually just call this one start. Then instead of that, that's going to be in there. Delete that off. And we need to make sure that we also use that there and that in there. And then that start dialog is what's being triggered from the interaction. The interact starts that up, and then this. Yep, that can work. Except no, that's gonna kill it off there. Okay, so we're gonna do an overloaded version of this without the same parameter. This is the one that'll be triggered from the interact there. And in this case, this one's going to be the StartDialog object. Okay, and then this one is used from here to specify an object. So let's just double check that our interact is still hooked up. Not that one, we want it to be the non-overloaded. I didn't save. And it's not there. Oh, there, start dialog. That one. Okay. And we got a null ref. Why? Oh, that's looking for start dialog option. We need that one. Also, because we renamed it, we don't actually have a start dialog. Let's just add that back in there from intro. That's the one. Okay, here we go. And if we do it again, then it doesn't work. Now why? Oh, we have multiple options. Ah, that's the other thing. Okay. So we need to delete all those buttons that get spawned. So let's do a list of game object for spawned buttons. Obviously you should probably use object pooling for this to prevent all this instantiation and destruction. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to just do it the most straightforward way. Okay, so that adds the button there, and this goes for each of the dialogues. Which means that you could come into a problem where you have a choice halfway through. Well, if there was a choice and it does come out the end here, we should probably just break out of that for each loop entirely. Then right at the end, we can just go spawn buttons, start for each, and I'm going to use a lambda expression here to destroy that object. And that should destroy them. And the other thing was, we're activating it there, yes, we're disabling it there, cool. I have a feeling that it wasn't getting to the end here because of that, so let's just test it out again. Okay, we've spawned our 3 options. And then it's done, cool. And then it doesn't get to the end, let's see why. Does those 2, and then it definitely doesn't turn that back on. Got the options there. Okay, let's just add in some logs over here. And actually let's just move that over there. Ah, option selected is never set to false. That's why. Let's add that to the bottom there. Yellow. Cool. Okay, there we have a dialogue chain. Let's see if we can actually expand on one of these a little bit and have and give 2 options there.
To wake up, you're going to wake up. And if you're not ready, you're going to stay pretending that you're just a little, poor little me.
And then we'll need to have FollowOn Dialogue for those. Put in 1 option for that. Okay, so on green, and do that. Ugh. Well, luckily those are scriptable objects, so they don't lose that information. Oh, and those green ones, the display time, set those up. And this dialogue there's no dialog choice there, and display timer 2. Cool. Okay, so green. And there we go, simple dialogue system using scriptable objects. Okay, if we just review, our actual dialog object is super simple. We have two custom data structs, one for our dialog segment, which holds the string, so the actual text that's spoken, a float for the amount of time we want to display that text for, and then a list of choices if we want to use choices. So if there are choices to give to the player, then you can add that in. And that dialog choice then is its own DAS structure with a string and a FollowOn object. So you would usually have your dialog choice right at the end of a chain, and then it'll follow on to another chain. And also the end dialog. Okay, so we actually haven't used this over here. Because we've got a list of options though, we don't really need that. Yeah, we don't actually need that. Let's take it out. And then in our interact, we've got links to our canvas, our text, for our spawning of our dialogue options there. And we also have a start dialogue option. So whenever you walk up to this particular NPC, this is where the dialogue will begin. Obviously, if you think about like something like World of Warcraft, when you come back from a quest, that dialogue will be different. But yeah, you would have to think about the architecture on how you would want to set that dynamically. Obviously, if there's only one player in the world, then it makes it easier, because once you've completed a quest, then just check before you start the dialogue, if that quest has been completed, then use this dialogue, otherwise use that one, etc. And you could build it into your quest system that the dialogue then changes. Otherwise, we start the dialogue over here through our interact on our player. So we have our interaction coming from there, which really should be on the player actually. I'm going to move that over to the player. And because of that, I just need to change my canvas to a serialized field and do that. It's just better to have your scripts where you expect to find them generally. Get canvas sorted. And maybe let's just move that one above that one. And I'll just apply that to my player variant as well. So I actually built my entire prefab on the same root prefab. So character is just a basic character, the cube thing. So they both look the same. All characters would be the same in a normal game. You could have a base character for all NPCs or for all players, and then have variants for different sort of things. So that is cool. And we just have an IEnumerator that will go through all the strings, play them out based on their time, and then if there are dialogue options, set up that dialogue and the button, which then takes care of itself over here and returns the selected option back to the interact, ending the chain. Cool, hope you found that useful. Cheers.